everyone for coming here today to attend the seminar. And today the seminar is on the anti-Chinese riot of 1880. And I think a lot of you may have heard about that, but today the Professor Zhu is going to talk more about that to let you know stories not only around the event, but the bigger picture of Chinese coming to America. And Professor Zhu was born in Shanghai, China. He received his PhD from the University of New Mexico. He is the professor and chair of the History Department at Eastern Washington University. He specialized in race and ethnicity in the 19th century American West. Dr. Zhu has published 3 books and many articles about the history of American frontier. His latest book, and we have a lot of copies there, is Road to Chinese Exclusion, the Denver Riot, 1880 Election and the Rise of the West. This book received the 2014 Carolyn Bancroft History Prize sponsored by the Denver Public Library. And after the seminar today, for anyone who wants to purchase the book, the professor will sign that, and the price for the book, I believe the published price is $35, although the price is not on that. So in case you are interested in that, after the seminar, professor will sign and you can purchase it there. And what we plan to do is the seminar probably will last between 45 to an hour, and the question and answer session is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes. Then afterward, for the walking tour actually is we are going to meet at Union Station, but the exact spot of the riot is 16 and Wazee. Therefore, we are going to start the walking tour at 3, so it will give people time to either drive there or walk there. But we will start from 16 and Wazee and go and walk around the area, the main area of the riot, probably a really short 20 to 30 minute walk. And also we will visit the House of Mirrors on Market Street. That is one of the places that provide shelter to a lot of Chinese females at that time. So now let us welcome Professor Zhu Liping.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for coming. And first of all, I'd like to thank NMU, local Asian American community, and his Colorado history for sponsoring this lecture. Particularly Colorado history, and it used to be called Colorado State Historical Society. I spent many hours there, the old building when I was doing research about a decade ago, and also the library. And again, thank you for everyone. Now, today is a very special day because today is the 135-year anniversary of the Denver anti-Chinese riot. It's a Halloween riot, so and also has a long-lasting impact in American history. Today's talk is not just focused on the Denver anti-Chinese riot, and actually it's much more broader. I will give a kind of brief overview of the Chinese experience in the United States in the 19th century, and then show you how this historical event would fit into this large narrative of American history. And after the talk, in the question and answer session, and also the walking tour period, we can discuss a lot of details about the riot. And I hope I don't bore you to death. Okay. My lecture here, formal talk, lasts about 45 minutes. Since the mid-19th century, when the first wave of Chinese immigrants reached the West Coast, American writers, journalists, and artists have been fond of the topics about this ethnic group. Mark Twain highlighted the Chinese in his famed novel, Roughly, and Charlie Russell in his telling sculpture entitled Not a Chinaman's Chance. A great number of dime novels introduce exaggerated fictional Chinese characters in a very creative way, exemplified by popular American stories like The Chinese in Buckskin. Chinese in Buckskin? And Buffalo Bill and the Chink War. There is no doubt that Chinese captivate contemporary Western writers and artists who help to formulate, for good or bad, the image of the Chinese in American popular and political culture. For the past 160 years, in fact, American writers have continued to place Chinese pioneers in the popular Western literature. Despite such a passion for the subject, though most authors characterize the Chinese as a foreign group, alien to mainstream American society on the periphery. Topics on social bias, racial conflict, and ethnic violence dominate the literature. Not only did such a narrow approach limit our ability to fully appreciate the Chinese contribution to the development of the region, but it inadvertently erected a mental barrier, a barrier of exclusion for this ethnic group in the grand narrative of American West. In the late 1960s, historians began to show their great interest in studying this ethnic group. However, even these ethnicity-conscious scholars often focus on the theme of ethnic subjugation. In the last 2 decades, moving away from the victimization premise, historians began to tell more accurate stories of the Chinese immigrant in the large context of American history, connecting them to a major national event. Drawing from a recent scholarship, including my own work, in the next few minutes, I will give a brief overview of how the Chinese pioneers ventured into the frontier American narrative. In talking about the history of the American West, we usually start with the Spanish borderland frontier, today's American Southwest. In 1585, 22 years before the founding of Jamestown in Virginia, 3 Chinese merchants boarded a Manila galleon, usually called China ship, that landed in Acapulco, where they disembarked for the overland trip to Mexico City. Because of China trade, and the road between Acapulco and Mexico City was soon called El Camino del Chino. That means China Road. By 1650, there were several thousand Chinese in New Spain. Mexico City even boasted a small Chinatown. Gradually, they moved northward, mining silver in Indian at Zacatecas. By the early 19th century, a few reached the California coast. Scholars now are venturing into this new terrain of the Spanish borderland frontier by studying the so-called Chino Chicanos, or Asian Latinos. Like on the Spanish borderland frontier, the early exploration and settlement of the Pacific Northwest had a strong Chinese connection. In the late 18th century, European maritime fur traders began to arrive in the region between 1788 and 1789. British ship captain brought several dozen Chinese craftsmen, carpenters, and blacksmiths to Vancouver Island. At Nootka Sound, the Chinese erected the first non-native dwelling in the Northwest. In 1789, the newly arrived Spanish arrested all the British officers as well as the Chinese artisan and intended settlers for allegedly entering Spanish territory. The famous Nootka Sound controversy of 1789 to 1793 eventually shattered this Chinese dream by establishing a permanent settlement in the area. Despite this unsuccessful attempt at a settlement, the lucrative China trade continued to garner attention from other explorers and adventurers, such as Alexander Mackenzie, David Thompson, Meriwether Lewis, and historians. Nevertheless, a significant number of Chinese immigrants did not arrive in the American West until the mid-19th century. In 1848, news of the gold in California traveled quickly along the entire Pacific Rim, reached China in October, only a few days after news of a gold rush had reached the East Coast. Some adventurous Chinese sailed from Canton to America right away. 325 Chinese claimed the title of 49ers. Another 3,100 arrived the next 2 years. For Chinese immigration to America, 1852 became the year of decision, with a sudden surge of 20,000 arriving in Gold Mountain, what the Chinese call San Francisco. In the next decade, an average of 10,000 came annually during that period. From 1852 to 1882, the U.S. government officially recorded the entry of some 340,000 Chinese, equal in 1880 to the entire population of New Hampshire, and twice the population of Oregon. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, about 200,000 illegal Chinese immigrants also entered the United States. Thus, a total of more than 500,000 Chinese arrived in the United States before the end of the 19th century. Although most of the early Chinese prospectors missed the initial gold rush, few failed to strike a real fortune. After taking out the easy gold, white miner either sold or abandoned, exhausted, claim, and move on to new digging, allowing the Chinese to gobble up those deserted claims at a little or no cost. Their cooperative strategy, extraordinary patience, low expenditure, and a superb water management resulted in their thriving throughout the gold field. In a few years, the Chinese possessed most of the claim in the initial gold region in California. In 1860, 30% of California's miners were Chinese. A decade later, they made up 57% of the miners. With a distinctive pattern of starting slow, then quickly dominate placer mining, the Chinese in the next quarter century repeated their success throughout the mining West. Reaching out from Northern California, the Chinese steadily spread to almost every corner of the West. Their extensive placer operation reached Nevada, Oregon, and Washington in 1850, Idaho and Montana in the 1860s, and Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, and Dakota in the 1870s. At that time, the Chinese constituted more than 25% of all miners in the western United States. This disproportionately high representation of the Chinese in the industry gave western mining states and the territories a prominent Chinese population. In 1870, Chinese constitute 8% of Nevada's population, 9% of California's, 10% of Montana's, and an astonishing 29% of Idaho. Now, probably you know, Idaho today is the whitest state in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody expects. Yeah, whitest.
Yeah.
In 19th century, almost 30%. The Chinese helped to found and populate hundreds of camps and towns, which became crucial to the settlement of the region, especially in the remote area. Like the French mining frontier, the construction of the transcontinental railroad drew still more Chinese to the interior American West. The Central Pacific ran from Sacramento eastward to meet the Union Pacific coming from Omaha. Yet, while the Union Pacific enjoyed a stable labor supply of Irish immigrants, the Central Pacific perpetually struggled to keep a committed crew. The superintendent for construction first tried 50 Chinese laborers. Impressed with their performance, the company quickly filled most construction positions with Chinese labor. In 1866, 11,000 Chinese were working in the high Sierra, making up more than 90% of the railroad's labor force. On May 10, 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was completed. The success of the Central Pacific motivated other railroad companies to recruit the highly productive Chinese workers. In the next 2 decades, all the major Western railroads, including the Southern Pacific, the Northern Pacific, the Great Northern, and even the Canadian Pacific, employ large number of Chinese. The Northern Pacific, for example, at one point, employed 15,000 Chinese online throughout Washington, Idaho, and Montana. By the late 19th century, Chinese laborers had helped to construct the true Northwest Passage, which turned an American imagination into a reality. Fittingly, the Northern Pacific Railroad incorporated the Asian Chinese yin yang symbol into a logo used for almost 80 years. Now, after the Burlington Santa Fe Northern, we see the purchase Northern Pacific, they changed the logo of this. You wonder why, how come an American company used the Asian symbol in 19th century, right? Even after completion the railroad network, railroad companies keep many Chinese on maintenance crew posted at numerous fueling stations in the town. Now, we are in the new era of a high-speed rail, right? More than 150 years later, and California's building the first high-speed rail. Now they hire Chinese again. Now this time, Chinese will come working as engineers and a supervisor. American will be the teacher. In addition to their omnipresence in mining and railroad construction, Chinese immigrants quickly penetrate into the American economic structure, vigorously competing for jobs in the labor market. Starting in the mid-1860s, they steadily expanded their labor presence in various manufacturing and service positions, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Chinese has discovered in the mid-1870s a new job market in the 7 canneries. A few years, more than 4,000 Chinese were working in 35 Columbia River canneries. They dominated the profession until the Second World War. Later, a new processing machine was insultingly called the iron chink. You go to Washington State Historical Society Museum, you can see this machine called iron chink. To provide many Western towns with necessary food and fresh produce, Chinese from very early on engaged in agriculture. Former rice peasants built an irrigation system for many companies and communities. In California alone, the Chinese helped to reclaim more than 1 million acres of farmland in the Sacramento Delta and the Central Valley. Throughout the 19th century, most Western cities and towns rely on these keen agriculturists for fresh produce and fruit. Extraordinary Chinese gardens dotted the rich Western landscape, such as Santa Clara Valley, California, Whidbey Island, Washington, and Garden City, Idaho. Chinese vegetable growers introduced celery, mustard greens into the American diet. Arbin of Oregon hybridized a superior crop of cherry, which still bears its name. We call it cherry. In terms of economic and social mobility, the experience of the Chinese